What is up, Internet? We are about to go plus ultra. Welcome to the first episode of the Otaku Remix. What is happening, people? My name is Brando, and welcome to the Otaku Remix Podcast, where I talk anything and everything manga and anime. And for this inaugural recording, I wanted to start by posing a simple question to you guys about what is possibly the hottest and quirkiest comic to ever come out of Shonen Jump. And that question is, what is so great about My Hero Academia? Now, to answer that question, I'm going to be breaking down the show into three main aspects, and I'm going to dive into how they're fueling this awesome anime hype train. And before I begin, the obvious disclaimer, there's going to be some light spoilers for the material up until episode 62 of the anime. I'm going to do my best to keep these to a minimum, but obviously if you have not caught up yet, please feel free to go get caught up and come back when you're ready. Now, let me pose a second question. What do you typically want out of a long-term investment? Now, I know that question is pretty nebulous and is probably getting you guys to think of a bunch of different things, but specifically when it comes to entertainment. And what I mean by that is when you decide to read a novel, or go see a feature film, or start watching a TV series, whether that's anime or otherwise, or read a comic book series, whether that's manga or otherwise, there's that certain level of caution in the selection process because we have that innate understanding that these forms take a lot of our time. There's a lot of investment that we have to give out, and we want some good ROI. We want some good return on our invested time with these things. And just because of the law of averages, there's more crap than gold. You know, there aren't that many Game of Thrones. There aren't that many Dark Knights. Typically, we end up going to see Transformers Age of Extinction, and it fucking sucks because these are some of the biggest colossal wastes of our finite time on Earth. But some of these long-form stories, some of them can be some of the most complex and rewarding stories that we ever experience, and I really believe that My Hero Academia is a champion of that. It's a great refinement. It's a distillation of what good shonen series can be, from its design to its execution. So let's get into that. Let's get into that exactly. Let's get into its design, its character design, and its setting. Now, the first thing I noticed when I started re-examining character design in My Hero is something that I now kind of coined in my brain as the quintessential skill of Kohei Horikoshi, the creator of Boku no Hero Academia, My Hero Academia. I'm going to call it My Hero because I'm American and I speak English, and that is his ability to be concise. My Hero throws a lot of characters at you right out the gate, and my first impression of a lot of them was that they were these simple avatars for tropes in anime. And while it kind of sounds like a weakness, when I start to look at it retrospectively, I see it as a strength. When we meet the protagonist, Izuku Midoriya, aka Deku, the plot frames him in these situations where he's clearly supposed to be the underdog. The first scene is a flashback of him getting beat up by Bakugo, his childhood friend and bully, defending some random kid, and then flash forward to the present. He's still getting bullied by Bakugo, but that's just because he's an asshole. But even without these contextual plot scenarios, from his constant nervous expression, from his boyish freckled face to his short stature, just looking at him, we can read him as the plucky, up-and-coming young hero. And the same goes for Bakugo. With his wild hair, his rage-filled eyes, even his name, if you really want to get into it, Bakugo, which is reference to the Japanese word bakuhatsu, which means explode, it's easy just to look at him and see, oh, he's an overly aggressive rival type. And this is true for a lot of the supporting cast. When Ochaku comes around, has this seemingly permanent smile, the rounder features. It's easy just to look at her and say, bubbly cheerleader. Same thing with Ida. When Ida comes around with his tinted glasses and his rigid mechanical movements, he's got this by the book rule enforcer type character. And these personas only get more exemplified when the hero costumes come into play. And the benefit of Horikoshi leaning into these quote-unquote tropey designs is that he gives the audience the ability to read a character's tone and function quickly without needing to spend a whole lot of time on unnecessary exposition. And before I begin, I know I'm calling them tropey and simple, but let me make doubly clear this isn't a knock on the designs, because My Hero's world is filled with some of the most wonderfully creative characters I've seen in recent memory. Hero Class A alone has 15 unique character designs, and all of them have that ability to hold interest and weight from the early parts of the story moving forward, even when we don't know a lot about them, just because they're just so much fun and they make us curious. Kyoka, when she's introduced, I don't really know who this girl is, with the USB cords for earlobes and amps attached to her ankles, but she's clearly a rocker, and I just kind of dug the look from the get. Same thing with Suyu-chan. I didn't know that I would think that a cute anthropomorphic frog girl would be a high-level waifu, but she always had that really cool green costume. But back to their functionality in relation to the plot, because My Hero doesn't waste any time diverting any unnecessary attention to its supporting cast, it spends a majority of its first season solidifying the core appeal in the main characters in All Might and in Deku, which is where the focus needs to be in the early parts of the story. It's imperative because in these very long shonen stories, we experience everything in relation to Deku and to our protagonist, and it's critical that academia spend meaningful time developing ways that we can connect and empathize with him. And for examples of the inverse, let's take a look at another popular shonen series really quickly. Let's talk about Bleach. Bleach invests full episodes and a significant period of time during its second season, during the Rukia rescue arc, to introduce captains, to introduce denizens of Soul Society, concepts about spiritual pressure, and while a lot of that information it's logical and it's useful, it grinds the pace of the story to a halt because of it though. And ultimately, a lot of those characters that were introduced and the concepts that were introduced never affect the long-term plot in like any significant way that I can remember. So I've talked a lot about character design. Let me talk about the other part of the design really quickly, the setting. The setting in My Hero Academia is something, again, I would call deceptively simple. It's a world that anyone could just blurb out of their mouth. It's a world where we all have superpowers. Superpowers that in My Hero Academia's world are colloquially called quirks. And try to say that 5 times fast. Colloquially called quirks. Colloquially called quirks. Fuck that shit. Anyway. But even though a majority of the population have these quirks, only the most exceptionally skilled and driven people can take up the profession of hero, and the fact alone that it is a profession becomes meaningful later. Now, the design of My Hero's world has a bunch of different butterfly effects that pop up in different ways throughout the story, so I'm going to bring up the many ways that it does as we go through the next 2 main aspects. Now, the second main aspect of My Hero's success is one that is very obvious, yet surprisingly intelligent. And that is My Hero Academia's action. Because indeed this still is a shonen battle anime, there's a ton of great fight scenes, fantastic action set pieces, all of which translate wonderfully from the manga thanks to Studio Bones' work. They've done fantastic stuff in the past: Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, Eureka 7, Stan Lee's Hero Man, Cowboy Bebop movie, etc, etc. Great resume. And the action in My Hero Academia, it's always meaningful. That's the best part about it. In the beginning, one of the first fights is a great cathartic fight between Bakugo and Midoriya when they square off for the first time in a UA hero training exercise, but none are more meaningful in that first season than the fight between All Might and Nomu. And what I like so much about that fight is not only because it's this fantastic visual, it's like a pure brawl between the genetic freak Nomu, who's specifically designed to kill All Might at his full strength, and All Might, who we know from earlier story developments is getting weaker by the day, but it has this great built-in emotional narrative and a sort of mechanical purpose moving forward for the overall story. Now, really quickly diving into that fight, the emotional narrative of it is focused in on All Might. He's the symbol of peace and justice for the world, and he's constantly called the pillar for which this entire hero-based society leans on. But because he's weakening, like we said, it puts into question how much longer is he going to be able to maintain this. And because of these circumstances, the intrigue of the fight rather, starts to hinge less on the awesome technical merits of the fight. It's a joy to watch, it's really kinetic, but more onto All Might's struggle to overcome his limitations and prove to everyone and himself that he's still this hero that everybody loves and needs. And that's the great thing about so many of the fights in My Hero, is that they're not just about good guys beating bad guys, but it's where the combat can be a vessel for characters like All Might to confirm to himself that he's still worthwhile. It's an avenue for which through which many characters communicate and work out their internal struggles in the fight. Deku's fight with Todoroki is a fantastic one in the Todoroki and the tournament arc, and his after-school round 2 bout with Bakugo are awesome examples of the characters communicating through the combat. And I'd love to expound longer on those 2 fights in particular, maybe in a future episode. Additionally though, with the fight between All Might and Nomu, it helps to cushion one of the hardest problems to deal with in shonen manga that I feel Boku no Hero deals with very well, and that's the problem of power escalation. And for me to grossly oversimplify and define what that problem is in a short statement, it would be that it's when the escalation of the stakes of a conflict begin to deflate what the dramatic tension is. The easiest and quickest offender for me to point to would have to be Dragon Ball Z. And the way Dragon Ball Z did it was, in the beginning of Dragon Ball, they had power levels to define the enemies, to define how dangerous they were, and that was ultimately superseded by the series staple transformations. Now, the problem with transformations, the transformations weren't the problem, I should say. They were a symptom of the real issue. Their implementation in Dragon Ball Z created this habitual cycle with creator Akira Toriyama's writing, where he would have the hero, he would have Goku power up, then Frieza power up, and Goku power up again, and you'd see the cycle there. And the problem that's rooted in that theory, in that cycle, is that you need to create a bigger problem at all. Tangibly, you'd think that blowing up the planet sounds much worse than losing a job or losing a friend. But more often than not, it's been my personal experience that self-contained personal stories leave more of an effect on me, more of an effect on most audiences. Because most people care more about the characters that they're looking at. They care about the characters that they've come to love and understand more than the entirety of the world that they inhabit. And that's another thing that My Hero Academia does right. There's hardly any arc or any fight that isn't grounded in personal stakes, and I think that's really important, especially with this fight with Nomu and All Might. So mechanically, All Might is the tippy top of the power pyramid. Instead of Deku and his friends escalating their strength into some sort of infinity, we see exactly what the strongest character is capable of. We're able to quantify the difference, and as a result, My Hero Academia creates this stable gradient of a stable pace of growth without anything seeming terribly forced. So I've been talking a lot about how things coexist with plot, how they coexist with character development, but just the literal way quirks get used in the action is super novel. It's wonderfully creative almost all of the time. The cavalry battle in the second season and the tournament arc shows off a ton of different strategies where teams of 4 are combining and coordinating their respective quirks, and it's that experimentation that's at the heart of what makes My Hero Academia so much fun to watch. The teacher for My Hero, for Hero Class A, for Midoriya's class, Eraserhead, says something to the effect of, at one point, you can't be a pro if you've only got one trick. And I like that statement because it really reflects the idea that you can't solely rely on the power of one quirk alone. Whatever your quirk is, obviously some quirks are more advantageous than others. Bakugo has a huge advantage over Mineta, the great throwing guy, but your quirk really means nothing if you can't make the most of it in a bad situation. Most of the quirks inherently have built-in foils anyway, so that one respective user doesn't have the power to answer all problems at all times. For example, Ida gets really fast and can do that burnout move, but then he stalls out. Ochako, she can apply her zero gravity effects to a majority of things, but she has this limit and then will just vomit her rainbows. And the very obvious one, Deku, breaking almost any bone in his body where he can't really control one for all yet. It's these limitations, along with the nature of being a quote-unquote professional hero, that really help ground this overall very fantastic world. And it presents a lot of interesting outcomes developmentally, how that would affect the characters. You see characters like Todoroki and Bakugo who grow up with a large amount of expectations because of their powers. Bakugo, who's told from the age of 4 that he's going to be this fantastic hero and he's the greatest, he develops these retarded amounts of pride. And Todoroki, who was genetically bred to have this very advantageous quirk combination, has a very tumultuous relationship with his father, and it develops into a resentment for the power, for half of his power, for that flame-spewing right side of him. It symbolizes a very painful part of his life. So going into more of the emotional and ideological ideas, let's talk about the third aspect I want to get into. And that's what My Hero does intelligently from a thematic standpoint. Because My Hero Academia does delve into a lot of interesting and relevant themes. One of which that is at the center of everything is this question of, what does it mean to be a hero? The answer to that question, whatever it may be, dictates the ideology of every character in My Hero's universe. And my favorite reaction to that question comes from a villain, actually. It comes from the villain, it comes from the hero killer Stain. Stain is this character whose flaw is that he believes so devoutly in the idea of the selfless, virtuous hero, specifically in the example that All Might sets forth, that anyone that falls short of it immediately becomes a villain in his eyes. Stain, he hates the industrialized version of heroism that's been created in academia's world so much that he begins this one-man war to purge the streets of heroes that he deems unfit so he can create this society that abides by ideal heroics. And the best part about all of it is that it actually works. Like, it's working. Every city that Stain operated out of saw this dramatic decrease in crime. So while, he's killing innocent heroes, but the results of his action, he creates an argument that he could potentially be leading to more lives being saved. Make no mistake though, Stain is not posed as an anti-hero. He's unequivocally the villain of the hero killer arc, but he brings into question the relationship between heroes and villains in My Hero's world, and not just in My Hero Academia's world, but possibly in fiction in general. The fact that heroes and villains are just two sides of the same coin. Exceptional people who've taken up causes whose morality can only really be judged subjectively. The villains of My Hero have morality that kind of varies, but our more or less series antagonist, Tomura Shigaraki, who leads the League of Villains, he has an interesting way of discovering his ideology. Because at the beginning of the story, he seemingly has none. He's a petty, temperamental, annoying character who always wants to be at the forefront of the attention, and my first impression of him was that he's just going to be this repeated, random encounter villain who just shows up, throws an occasional wrench into the hero's plans, and pieces out. But he unexpectedly evolved. He starts by first taking his hard L when he makes the first attack on UA, and he fails. He fails at his plan, which is to kill All Might, and he gets severely wounded, and he motivates his future opponents. He motivates the heroes like Deku and his other foils. And his change really begins when he suddenly decides to meet Stain. He meets Stain in hopes to sway to join him, to have Stain join his cause. But Stain, who has a very clearly defined purpose, sees that Shigaraki clearly has none, spurns him, fucks him up a little bit, and just rejects Shigaraki. What follows continues to be a little bit interesting. Shigaraki, out of annoyance, releases a bunch of the Nomu, a bunch of the genetic animals that have been gifted to him by his master, on the same night that Stain is supposed to go out and kill a hero. But despite the Nomu that Shigaraki released causing immense damage to the city, causing a huge problem, the media stays entirely focused on the episode of the events revolving around Stain. And the whole episode, the whole event, motivates a bunch of villains to come out of the dark, and they decide to try and join Shigaraki because they think that he coordinated the attack with Stain. They think that he's representative of Stain's ideology, and instead of instantly accepting this bunch of new followers to the League of Villains, this pushes him to explore why Stain is so favored over him, which eventually pushes him to the season 2 finale, again spoiler, to meet Deku and have a conversation with him which motivates Shigaraki into that self-discovery of his purpose to kill All Might, and his vision of peace and justice, which Shigaraki is disgusted with. He's disgusted with the unrealistic and ridiculous nature of that notion, and yet it's not the most profound manifesto, but it's the way that he's set up. It's the way that Shigaraki is presented to evolve alongside Deku, alongside his protagonist, that makes his character arc so compelling to me. On the whole, Horikoshi's willingness to change and evolve his characters is a big part of what makes My Hero never feel stagnant. The hero costumes constantly change. The abilities of the characters change in scope and implementation. They're currently making special moves for them. And Deku's entire fighting style, the willingness to change a character that has punched his way through 2.5 seasons worth of his problems to now developing what he calls the shoot style, where he focuses on kicking, is really emblematic of how this show is never averse to letting the characters develop constantly. And it's that development that's at the heart of every shonen series that is great, because most of these shonen series are coming-of-age stories. Their inherent appeal, besides in the visceral action and the occasional cheesecake fan service, is to watch these characters grow over long periods of time, and to tackle a variety of different challenges along the way. And it's in the way that My Hero Academia balances unexpectedly realistic and grounded themes, fantastic and inventive action, and supremely creative and malleable character design. It's all of that together that is what makes My Hero Academia great. So on that, I will wrap up this episode of the Otaku Remix. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you do, show me some love wherever this ends up. Like, subscribe, and all that. And if you know a topic you'd like me to tackle in the future, please just shoot it into the comment section below. As always, my name is Brando, and as they say in the land of Moonspeak, sayonara, I'll see you next time.